Okay, where we left off last class was the foreign policy of Richard Nixon and the events in the Middle East with the Yom Kippur War of 1973. Israel was attacked by its Arab neighbors, primary countries involved. The aggression towards Israel was Egypt and Syria, but ultimately would include other countries like Iraq, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Algeria, Morocco, which is the far western part of North Africa, and then Cuba as well. The Soviet Union was involved in providing aid as well to these Arab nations who did not like having a Jewish state in an Arab-dominated region. The United States prepared its nuclear forces and put them on high alert and declared support for Israel. And in response, the Middle Eastern countries organized an oil embargo against the U.S., the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. So we could not get enough oil, therefore there was a gas shortage and potential energy crisis as well. In the United States, people had to wait for hours to get in line, and when they finally got to the gas stations, they were met by limits on how much gas they could actually pump into their gas-guzzling automobiles. More foreign policy under Nixon's administration. Henry Kissinger, who becomes his Secretary of State, participates in what is known as shuttle diplomacy. Kissinger worked with both Jewish and Arab states to try to create a lasting peace in the Middle East region. And the shuttle diplomacy is a reference to the fact that he basically went from country to country in the Middle East region to try to settle the disputes in the area. On to domestic policy of Richard Nixon. He institutes what is known as New Federalism, a shift of responsibility for social programs to the states. Under Lyndon Johnson, the federal government took the lead in providing opportunities and assistance and aid to those people who needed it. Richard Nixon decided it's not the federal government's position to do so, so therefore he issues what is known as block grants to the states, and then the states can decide if there are people in need in their individual states, then the states are the best ones to decide how that money should be used, not the federal government. Okay. So Congress passed earmarks to give money to specific social programs, and Nixon refused to allocate that money to those programs, citing that the state government should be doing this. So that's a shift in domestic policy, domestic funding and aid to people who are in need. As we get into the 70s, within Nixon's presidency and beyond, the nation is faced with what becomes known as stagflation. It's an economic problem that had never happened before, and they had to create a name for it, hence the title, stagflation. It's a time period in which you have high unemployment along with high inflation. Those two things don't usually happen at the same time, so these are unique circumstances in an evolving economy. So what are the causes of stagflation? The expense of both war and Great Society programs with no tax increases, and the Great Society programs provided aid to people in need under Lyndon Johnson, but he didn't want to raise the taxes to be able to pay for those programs. Increased international competition. Foreign nations are over-reliance on foreign oil. And then we have a flood of new workers as baby boomers are entering the workforce. There's not enough jobs to keep up. Therefore, unemployment is going to climb. Nixon's response and handling the situation, he tried to raise taxes, cut the budget, froze wages and prices, severed the dollar from gold. They practiced Keynesian economics. And again, Keynesian economics is the main premise is the practice of the idea of the government spending money that it doesn't have in an effort to get the economy going. FDR did this to deal with the Depression, and famously Richard Nixon said that every president after FDR had to be a Keynesian philosopher due to the fact that they did not want to be president if another depression hit. Nixon's decline. The election of 1972 versus Democrat nominee George McGovern is going to lead to the demise of Nixon because he so desperately wanted to win that he's going to participate in some, or members of his administration and the federal government are going to participate in some illegal activities. Nixon does defeat McGovern, although he is very paranoid. He had a enemies list, and whenever you have an enemies list, you know that things have gotten pretty bad for you when you have to make one. Barbra Streisand and Paul Newman, famous actress and actor during this time period, were on Nixon's enemy list with their liberal support of politicians. He had rivals phone wire tapped. He had an organization that was called CREEP, and it stood for the Committee to Re-elect the President, and they participated in illegal tactics to get him reelected, including burglary. The plumbers, and as we look at this next slide here, we can kind of see this list of Nixon's transgressions as president and his leadership, either directly or indirectly involved with these things. The plumbers was a group that was put together to fix leaks coming out of the government about Nixon's Vietnam policies. Remember that New York newspapers revealed the Pentagon Papers that the United States was expanding the war in Vietnam in bombing Cambodia. So the plumbers were meant to try to stop those leaks. The IRS was used to go after people who were considered enemies to Nixon's administration as well. So a variety of different ways in which Nixon was and or his supporters were using these things to get him reelected. Ultimately, the Watergate scandal, which members of CREEP, Committee to Re-elect the President, broke into the Democratic National Committee headquarters. They were discovered by a security guard that found a tampered lock. They might have gotten away with it if it wasn't for that tampered lock. It was really kind of a non-story until Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein discovered the connection to the White House. And here are the burglars of the Watergate scandal. You can see far left here, James W. McCord, a former CIA agent and member of the Committee to Re-elect the President. Ultimately, this is going to be what brings Richard Nixon down. Here's Woodward and Bernstein. All the President's Men was a movie with Robert Redford, and also starring Dustin Hoffman. It's an older film, but it's a good one that does a pretty good job of telling the story of the Watergate scandal. So Richard Nixon discovered that he had taped conversations proving he had covered up the break-in. And although he might not have been the one connected to the direct order to do or commit the break-in, but the cover-up certainly he was connected to. Prosecutors demanded the tapes. Nixon had the prosecutors fired. New prosecutor comes in, demands the tapes. Nixon refused, citing executive privilege, and then it winds up going to the courts. U.S. versus Richard Nixon court rules he must overturn the tapes, and when he does, the tapes had deleted sections. So in August of 1974, Richard Nixon resigns the presidency, and this is not the only embarrassment of his administration. His vice president, prior to his resignation, his vice president Spiro Agnew was connected to taking bribes and also tax evasion, and was forced to resign himself, and that is why Gerald Ford became Nixon's vice president at the tail end of his administration. And because of that, he is going to be the next president of the United States, at least for a short period, to finish Nixon's second term. Gerald Ford had a reputation, even though he played Division I football, University of Michigan, for being quite a clumsy president. Chevy Chase had a field day on Saturday Night Live depicting his clumsiness. One of the first things he has to deal with is what to do with the outgoing president. And what he decides to do is give Richard Nixon a full pardon, which is controversial, but ultimately he decided to do this because, as he cited, that our long national nightmare is over. Now we can move on. If he did not do this, it probably would have gone through the courts and would have a big trial with Nixon dragging it out for years and years. And further pushing the country into a feeling of distrust towards the government. We also have the final evacuation of Vietnam under Gerald Ford, 1975, which we've discussed already. Jimmy Carter becomes the next president of the United States, and a Washington outsider, someone who is a man of honor. A simple man, a peanut farmer from Georgia, but the fact that he was a Washington outsider, it was believed that he is someone who could come in and be trusted. Problem is that he is lacking in strong personality. I would say his strengths, though, are bringing people together and pushing and promoting peace during his presidency. The day of his inauguration, he walks from giving his speech to the White House to show that he's just a regular person. Also, to show that he's a regular person, dresses fairly casually with Argyle sweaters, and unfortunately, his years in office become nicknamed the years of malaise, not known as necessarily being one of the strongest of leaders, commanders-in-chief. The continued issue of economic problems and the shortage of gas plague the economy, but again, if we're looking at things that Carter was able to accomplish, you can maybe look to trying to promote peace in areas of conflict. The Camp David Accords, who we see here pictured, are the leaders of both Egypt and Israel, and according to the Camp David Accords, Egypt becomes the first Arab nation, the first nation in the Middle East to recognize Israel as an independent nation. Also, we have issues in the Middle East region, Southwest Asia, and Afghanistan, where the Soviets invade, and the United States will send support to try to repel communist takeover in Afghanistan. We embargo the trade of grain to the Soviet Union. We boycott the Moscow Olympics in protest of their imperialist goals in Afghanistan. And we support the Mujahideen group that will fight against the Soviets. And when we go in later, after 9/11 to Afghanistan, after 2001 attacks, we will wind up facing some of the same old weapons that we supplied this group with in 1980 that they used to fight against us when we are in Afghanistan to fight the war on terror. Also issues in the Middle East region, the country of Iran. Here we have on the left the Ayatollah Khomeini and the Shah of Iran. There is a Islamic revolution in Iran, and the Ayatollah takes over. The Shah is pushed out and seeks medical attention. The United States permits him to receive medical attention and provides aid to the Shah, who we had supported for so many years. And in response, in Iran, you have the Iran hostage crisis. The movie Argo is a pretty good movie that shows at least a portion of the prisoners that were held there. Limburg High School has a resident, or Limburg School District has a resident, Rocky Sickman, who lives in the district, who wrote a book about his experiences there. There were failed attempts by Carter's administration to get the prisoners out. Ultimately, they were held for over a year and were not released until the day and after the time in which Ronald Reagan took the oath of office. Therefore, kind of a slap in the face to Jimmy Carter. Even though he was able to push and promote peace in places, he could not successfully get the hostages out of Iran. It was not until Ronald Reagan took office that the government of Iran released the American prisoners.